And welcome to another Metascientific Society of Skill Acquisition workshop / presentation. Today, we are joined with Mariane, who is a Director of Skill Acquisition and Psychophysiology Lab at Boise State University. She is one of the co-authors of some of the influential metascientific work that we're seeing in the motor learning and skill acquisition space. So we're quite excited to have her here today. Her talk is going to focus on her experiences as an early career researcher, which I think is going to be quite interesting given a lot of the conversations that we've had so far have talked about metascience and trying to improve the quality of our research. But then we've had the broader discussion of, well, how does this impact early career researchers and PhD students who are trying to move into academic roles and under the constraints of trying to publish and have an identity to still uphold that quality of science. So I think it's going to be really interesting to hear from her experiences and some of the barriers that she's facing in doing metascientific work. So pleased to have you, and I'll pass over and let you have a talk, and then we'll go through some questions at the end. Thanks for coming.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Kyle. Everyone, it is truly an honor and a pleasure to join you all today. So thank you so much for having me. I titled my presentation, Impactful Research and the Quantity-Quality Trade-Off, Perspectives of an Early Career Faculty on Balancing the Need for Better Research and Career Demands. Before we get into it, though, I want to give you an idea of what to expect from this talk. So I organized this presentation into three main sections. Section 1, I'm going to provide you with some context because everything has context. Next, I will talk about the challenges of balancing research quality and quantity in light of the constraints imposed by my own context in this case, but also in relation to the discipline of motor learning. And finally, I will describe a couple of strategies that I have been trying to implement in my lab in order to produce better research in a system that rewards publishing more and quickly. So first things first, providing context. For the next couple of minutes, I will share with you a little bit about my background, my research interests, and my career goals. My hope is that this information will help you understand my constraints a little bit better, which will then provide context for the strategies that I'm going to share later on. So currently, I am a tenure-track assistant professor in the School of Kinesiology at Boise State University, located in Boise, Idaho, USA. So currently, Boise State is what we call an R2 institution, meaning that it's an institution with high research activity, high research spending, and that has some programs that graduate PhD students. However, that's changing rapidly because currently, Boise State's main goal is to achieve the Carnegie R1 designation. And what that means is the goal is to go from being an institution with high research activity to becoming an institution with very high research activity. And what that means in practical terms is that we're going to have to attract more federal funding, we're going to have to publish more, and we're going to have to graduate more PhD students. So here at Boise State, I am the director of the Skill Acquisition and Psychophysiology Lab, and my lab has three main research lines. The primary one is in motor skill acquisition, so I'm interested in training strategies, so what makes the motor skill acquisition process effective, but also the mechanisms underlying these strategies. Secondary line that I have is focused on metascience applied to skill acquisition. So here, my goal is to evaluate research practices in skill acquisition and then propose strategies to increase rigor and reproducibility. And a third research line that I have is focused on physical activity and health. So this is something that I started doing in my PhD and something that I'm still doing now as an early career faculty. So here, I'm interested in understanding a little bit more about the mechanisms underlying physical activity behavior. Finally, the last thing that I want to share with you is my current career goal. So right now, my main goal is to obtain tenure and promotion to the associate level. And that's important for me for a couple of reasons. One it comes with a significant increase in base salary. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Boise, Idaho before, but right now there are a lot of people moving to Boise, Idaho, which means that the cost of living is increasing dramatically. So that increase in salary is going to be really, really beneficial. And true, because it also comes with job stability. And I know that most people would appreciate that. And I appreciate that even more because job stability is what I need to maintain my status as an immigrant. So this is where I am. This is what I do. And this is where I'm hoping to be in the near future. But my story with skill acquisition actually started many, many years ago when I was an undergrad in Brazil. So my first contact with research and skill acquisition happened when I was attending the Federal University of Lavras. So I've always been fascinated by our ability to acquire motor skills, and I just wanted to know more about that process. So I ended up joining the motor behavioral lab at this institution, and I spent about 3 years working in that lab. I even got to design and conduct my first research experiment for my senior thesis, which was focused on examining the effects of combining self-controlled demonstration and knowledge of results on motor skill learning. And I had an amazing time running that project, really found myself in that space. So I decided that that was the career that I wanted to pursue. Because of that, my natural next step was to go to grad school. And that's how I found myself moving to a small town in Alabama to attend Auburn University. So at Auburn, I had the privilege of training under Dr. Matthew Miller, and I was lucky enough to be closely supported and mentored by Dr. Keith Lowe's. So as these two professors guided me through the process of creating my own research program, they placed a strong emphasis on producing work that was informative, that was of high quality. So we had a lot of conversations around what that would look like for my discipline, motor learning. For instance, we talked about how we wanted to try to recruit larger samples and justify our sample size, how we wanted to try and conduct multiple data collection sessions for our studies, and also spend more time refining our task paradigm to ensure that our studies had high internal validity. But we also had broader conversations about good research practices, and that's how I got introduced to the open science movement. So as I started learning more about the open science movement, I was introduced to good strategies and practices such as re-registrations. So the need to write your research questions, your hypotheses, important details about your study design and data analysis plan, and make those things available before you start the experiment. I also learned about this thing called register reports and how we should be collectively trying to go in that direction more often. I also learned about the importance of writing up my protocols for transparency and reproducibility and making my data and my data analysis plan available whenever possible so people could double check my work. So the next step for me was to kind of like slowly try to implement those practices into my own research. And now I want to try to give you an idea of the kind of effort that it took to implement those practices into my own work. So this study, for example, conducted during my PhD, it was a pre-registered study. So we spent quite some time crafting the pre-registration because it was a rather complex study. And then we went on to recruit 200 participants. And then we ended up conducting 400 data collections because this was a 2-day experiment. Now, that may not sound as impressive to you depending on your research area. I really want to highlight the duration of those data collection sessions. So for instance, for day one, it would take me at least an hour and a half to collect data from one participant. Now, this was a quite long project, as you can see here. It took us 6 semesters to finish, which inevitably means that we did it through a global pandemic. So after we were cleared to go back to data collection after COVID, that same protocol became a 3-hour protocol. So it would take us 3 hours to collect data from one participant. And that was only made possible because I had a really solid team working with me. So I had the help of 2 PhD students who were very much in the lab with me collecting data. And I had the help of 11 undergraduate research assistants. And here I want to highlight the fact that my team changed a lot across those 6 semesters. So we had a lot of undergraduate students leaving and joining the lab throughout the duration of the project, which also means because of that, a lot of my time was actually spent on training the research staff, just to make sure that we were getting high quality data. Another example that I want to share with you, it's not in motor learning, but it's my first experience with register reports. So it's the study that you see over here. So I remember we started working towards this project in 2019. And as you can see here, it was published in 2023. So roughly 4 years in the making for one study. The study also had a fairly large sample size for this type of investigation. But again, I want to highlight the duration of the data collection sessions. So for this study, it would take us at least 3 hours to collect data from one participant, and the protocol was quite detailed. And because of that, if you look at the research team right here, we were actually not able to involve any undergraduate research assistants. So we relied on 3 PhD students and 2 master students to finish data collection for this project. And the final thing that I want to share about this, this paper is that during the register report process, we were asked to add a couple of things to our protocol. One of these things being running a bunch of simulations to estimate sample size for the study. So at the time, our team did not have any expertise in that area, which means that we had to go outside of the lab to find collaborators and experts in other fields that would be willing to join us on this project. So to try to sum up what I'm trying to illustrate here, trying to do good research takes a long time. It takes time to design meaningful studies, to train the research team, to recruit participants, to collect data. It also requires a great deal of collaboration across different levels. You can think of undergrad, graduate students, and PhDs working together. And it also requires access to resources, access to equipment, space, IT support, a centralized recruitment system. So what happens when you see yourself in a different context, but you still want to engage in good research, but now you have other demands too? So let's talk about the challenges with that. At the individual level, talking about my own experience, during my PhD, my main goal was to develop my research program. So that means that most of my time was spent in the lab collecting data, doing research, training research assistants, and disseminating results. The other important thing to highlight too is that my lab had a decent size cohort of graduate students. So I was not the only PhD student in the lab. We had a couple of students working together at the same time. And that gave me the opportunity to make contributions to my peers' projects, which then, I got some publications out of that. That really helped increase my productivity. Important to mention as well, I was working under a tenured mentor that really valued open science practices. So my mentor, Dr. Miller, he really focused on telling me to develop relevant skills and producing research that was informative. There was never pressure to publish as much as possible and as quickly as possible. However, maybe if he wasn't a tenured professor at the time, the story would have been different. And the final thing here that I want to highlight in terms of resources is the fact that at Auburn, I really had favorable conditions to do the type of research that I was doing. For instance, I had access to a centralized recruitment system, which made recruiting for my projects way easier than what it is now. But now my context has changed. Now I am an early career faculty, which means that my time currently is split between teaching, research, and service. And if you are in academia like me, you know that there's way more that go into each one of these categories. So right now, I don't have remotely the time that I used to have to conduct research. On top of that, I also have very specific requirements when it comes to research output. To give you an idea, I have to publish at least 2 papers a year, and it really matters if I'm either the first or the last author. And on the flip side, it doesn't matter where I publish my studies. It doesn't matter if it's of good quality or not. And if I adopt good research practices, that's not really rewarded or recognized. On top of that, I have the expectation of applying for grants, applying and trying to get grants, and especially federal grants. In terms of collaboration, right now, I run a lab that's really small. So I have 1 master student working with me, and he works an average of 20 hours a week in the lab. And I have 4 undergraduate research assistants. In addition to that, my lab is the only EEG and skill position lab on campus, which really limits the amount of collaborations that I can have within my own discipline. And finally, in terms of resources, I wanted to highlight 2 things. One, the fact that my program here at BSU, currently we don't have a PhD program. So I don't have access to PhD students who can maybe be in the lab conducting the research and collecting the data for me. And finally, we're still trying to figure it out how to implement recruitment systems. But right now, we don't have a centralized system to help us recruit participants for research. The examples that I just described are very specific to my reality and my context, but I also believe that we face challenges at the discipline level. So if you are a motor learning researcher like me, chances are you're going to face these challenges as well. So the first one that I have here is the fact that if you're doing experimental research in motor learning, you're going to need human subjects. And recruiting participants is no small task. And it's even more challenging depending on where you're doing your research. To give you an example, in Brazil, you are not allowed to give any sort of compensation in exchange for participation in research. Number 2, our studies include multiple data collections that are often characterized by long sessions, and I tried to illustrate that with my examples earlier. We often need to develop paradigms to answer research questions, which is time-consuming and resource-dependent. So I remember for one of my first studies during my PhD, I actually had to run a bunch of pilot studies just to figure out how to combine 2 tasks into 1 paradigm. So I actually spend a lot of time and resources and try to recruit people just to figure it out what the study design would look like before I started the main experiment. And finally, when compared to other disciplines, collecting data for a motor learning study requires a high level of engagement from the research team. And here's what I mean by that. If you think of a traditional motor learning study, 2 days collecting data on day 1 and day 2, there's going to be a lot of hands-on interactions with the participant. You're going to need to give very accurate task instructions. You're going to have to monitor data collection closely, perhaps to give feedback. And if there's any sort of problem, the troubleshooting is going to be specific to that session. So it's a little bit unpredictable to a certain extent. which is something that it's very hard to outsource to a computer, for example. On top of that, if you're dealing with a complex study and the protocol is very detailed, it's really challenging to have, for instance, an undergraduate research assistant running that study for you. So chances are you're going to need the help of a master's student or ideally a PhD student, or you're going to have to do it yourself. Having identified some personal and discipline-specific challenges to engage in good research, for the final part of this presentation, I want to share with you some of the strategies that I have been using to produce better research in a system that rewards publishing more and quickly. So I'm going to focus on 3 main strategies. The first one, tackling old problems from different angles, building multi-purpose data collections, and then finally, leveraging skill set. So strategy number 1, tackling old problems from different angles. So a known problem in motor learning is that our studies are underpowered. There are a lot of problems that come with that. For instance, it decreases your chances of finding an effect if the effect exists. Or if you do find an effect, chances are it's going to be exaggerated. So I pulled some data from past meta-science work to illustrate this idea of having studies that are underpowered. So here you're looking at a study done by McKay et al. In 2023, where they looked at the motor behavior literature. So they found that the median N group per group for a study that did not report a power analysis was 17.5, and the median N per group for a study that did report a power analysis was 16. And we can even look at within specific literatures. So I did a study with Red McKay, which was published in 24, where we looked at the enhanced expectancies and autonomy support literatures. So the enhanced expectancy and the autonomy support, they form the motivational pillar of optimal theory, which is one of the prominent theories in motor learning. And what we found is that the average statistical power of these 2 literatures combined is about 6%. So one way to try to overcome this problem is to try to increase our sample size. But the thing is, when we try to recruit more participants, that's going to come with some costs, especially when it comes, to spending time and resources to do that. If that's the case, one alternative is to leverage cross-site collaborations. So this is something that I'm trying now. So again, the goal is to increase sample size, and we can do that by leveraging cross-site collaborations. I just finished my first one, which was done in conjunction with Dr. C.J. Brush, who was at the time at the University of Idaho, so same state. So here we did a study focused on depression and physical activity in older adults. And what we did was we had 2 research teams, one at BSU and one at U of I, and each team had a principal investigator, a master's student who would lead data collection, and then a group of undergraduate research assistants who would help with data collection and data organization. And even though the design of the study wasn't that simple, as you can see here, we had 1 lab visit and then we monitored physical activity for 7 days. We were able to recruit 68 older adults in 1 semester. So we actually were able to finish the project in 1 semester, which is just amazing for me. It's something that I cannot do on my own within the same time frame. So what I'm doing right now, I'm taking the lessons from this study and the structure, and I'm applying it to a motor learning study. So this study is going to be done in conjunction with Juliana Parma. We're hoping to start data collection this semester, but the idea is the same, is to apply the cross-site collaboration in a motor learning study. Now, increasing sample size is one way to increase statistical power, but it's not the only way. And here I want to highlight the amazing educational work done by Dr. Keith Lowes. If you don't know, Dr. Lowes has a YouTube channel where he posts videos about topics such as sample size planning. So these are 2 of my favorite videos, What is Statistical Power and Developing Statistical Intuitions. And this is a screenshot from one of these videos where he talks about factors that will influence statistical power. So as you can see here, sample size is one of them, well known. You can also try to maybe make the effect a little bit bigger, maybe by giving larger doses, or you can try to play with the variance. Can you try to reduce the variance by maybe having tighter inclusion or exclusion criteria? And if you look down here, another option that you have is, well, can you try to change the design of your study? And that's exactly what I did for one of the first studies that I ran here at BSU. So the study was focused on motor performance differences as a function of self-talk content. And originally, when we were thinking about the study, designing the study, the design was a between subject design. So we had different groups. So when we ran the power analysis and to estimate the sample size based on the effect we're interested in, as you can see here, the number was, it's actually close to 100, which for me, it wasn't feasible at the time. So what we did was we went back to the original research and we were like, okay, maybe we can answer the same research question, but we can change the study design. And that's what we did. So we went from using a between subject designs to within subjects design. And as you can see here, the final sample size ended up being 34. Now, some may argue that the sample size is still on the lower end of sample sizes, especially considering the motor learning literature, and that's a fair point. But I also want to point out other measures that I have in place in most of my studies to make sure that the study is still informative. So for instance, for most of my studies, and this one included, we pre-registered the data analysis and the hypotheses. We also are making all study materials, data sets, and R code openly available. And we're going to be very, very transparent about the study strengths and limitations when we publish the manuscript. To summarize some of the benefits of these strategies, I believe I'm being effective in increasing statistical power while being more resource efficient. So here we have each research site maintaining high data collection standards while collecting data from fewer participants, which will reduce also the amount of time that you spend collecting data and the amount of time that you spend training the research staff. So it's more time efficient as well. And in some cases, it's actually more ecologically valid. So for instance, in the study that I did with Dr. Brush, we were actually able to recruit participants from varying socioeconomic status, which in that case increased the ecological validity of the study. Moving on to strategy number 2, building multi-purpose data collections. So as part of my research line in skill position, I often collect EEG or brain activity data alongside behavior measures. And depending on the research question, both types of measurements are combined to test a theory-driven hypothesis. So in a confirmatory motor learning study. However, in some cases, I collect EEG data alongside behavior measures in order to create a richer data set that can be later on explored to answer exploratory questions that are not related to the main experiment. So let me give you an example. So this is a study that I published last year, but the data that we used in this study was actually collected during a confirmatory study that was testing optimal theory predictions. So this study was published in 2022. So for this study over here, we collected data, EEG data from 134 participants. So it's a large EEG data set, especially because EEG was collected in the context of motor learning. And what we did was we modeled that EEG data to test reinforcement learning predictions and their underlying mechanisms in short and long-term behavior adaptation. So basically, from one data collection, we were able to get 2 publications out of it, and these are 2 very different papers. Finally, strategy number 3, leveraging skill set. As I mentioned earlier, during my PhD, my mentor really encouraged me to learn relevant skills. And at the time, I was already reading up a lot of meta science work. So I decided to learn some meta-analytical skills and apply them to research skill acquisition. And that's what I'm still doing to this day. So it's a type of work that I really enjoy doing. I enjoy the process of doing meta science work, but also I think it's the type of work that it's going to increase my research productivity, sure, but it also has the informative component. I think it has the benefit of informing future studies. Let me give an example of that. So this is a project that I did with doctors Mike Carter and Brett McKay, where we looked at the current state of the reproducibility of power analysis in motor behavior research. So in addition to finding that currently the reproducibility of power analysis is quite low in our area, we were able to, based on those findings, actually come up with some really straightforward and simple guidelines that researchers can maybe use if they want to improve the reproducibility of the power analysis that they report in their research. So it's a nice side of this type of work. In terms of like broad benefits of this strategy, it is more flexible, meaning that I don't have to be in the lab collecting data. It's also more resource efficient because I only need access to a computer, with internet. And if well done, it can have a significant impact on future research. You can think about meta-analysis generating, effect size estimates that can then be used to inform future experimental work. It also increases research impact. I often have people outside of my discipline consuming this type of research. And on a personal note, it is a really good excuse to see the people that I like more often. For example, right now I'm doing 2 separate meta science projects, and I'm doing them with Juliana Parma. So because of that, she has to see me every other week because we have to meet up and talk about the project. To conclude, the research that I presented here today, it's not perfect by any means, but my goal is not actually to be perfect, is to try to do things better. So I've learned a lot since my very first study that I conducted here at the University of Lavras, but the reason why I pursued this career remains the same. I'm still very much fascinated by our ability to acquire motor skills, and I just want to know more about it. So now that I get to generate knowledge in this area, I'm working really hard to maintain a level of productivity that meets the requirements for my context without compromising the quality of my work. Couldn't end this talk without thanking my amazing mentors, Drs. Miller and Lowe's. Special shout out to Dr. Parham and Dr. Rush, who have accepted my invitation to run data collection cross country. And my students, former and current students, who very much embrace the open science movement and understand the importance of doing good research, even if that means writing 368 protocols every single semester. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Amazing, thank you. I'm just so impressed that you get so many students involved in your projects. I struggle to get any research assistant, even when I pay them. So